Welcome to the Purpose to Prosperity Summit, where you're here to awaken your unique gifts. You're here to unlock your tremendous potential and to unleash that power, that prosperity that we all have within. I have an amazing guest with me today, Dr. Maya Shetreat, and let me tell you a little bit about her. Maya Shetreat, MD, is a neurologist, herbalist, urban farmer, and author of The Dirt Cure, which has been translated into 10 languages. She's been featured in the New York Times, The Telegraph, NPR, Sky News, The Dr. Oz Show, and more. Dr. Maya is the founder of the Terrain Institute, where she teaches earth-based programs for transformational healing, including professional training programs for psychedelic-assisted approaches. She works and studies with indigenous communities and healers from around the world, and is a lifelong student of ethnobotany, plant healing, and the sacred. Welcome, Dr. Maya.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think one thing that's not in that bio is that I also am a Hellenistic astrologer.
There you go. Okay, so she's a fellow astrologer. We're astrology sisters. And so what is she not, right? I mean, this is a woman, and this is where I want to start with her. And this is the reason we invited her to be in the summit. She is one of those few people or few women who are currently doing something that is one of my favorite things. And it's, I think, one of the reasons I'm also here on Earth, to marry the scientific with the sacred. So the first question I want to ask you, Dr. Maya, is what is sacred? What do you mean by sacred?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways we could approach the concept of the sacred, but it's really about approaching life, all life, and seeing all life as, or through a lens of reverence, wonder, awe, humility, gratitude.
That's beautiful. How does that, let me ask you this. How did you come into what you're doing now? Because this is, I think, one of my favorite things about this summit is the inspirational stories of everybody sharing how they got to where they are now, how they got to their point of marrying purpose and prosperity, doing what they came here to do as a soul, which we know, through astrology and many other things, that nobody's here randomly. We're here for a reason. So what's your story? How did you come to do what you're doing now?
That might take a little longer than just this little interview, but it's so interesting how we get these little inklings or travel on these little paths during our lives, and then kind of how everything can come together in a confluence. But even the fact that I went to medical school to begin with was because I saw a Bill Moyers special, actually, when I was I think in college, called Healing in the Mind. And they told this story in this series about a young girl with lupus who was taking medication that was causing her to have kidney failure. But when they'd stop the medication, she would have a flare of her lupus. So they started to give her castor oil along with her medication, and then stopped giving her the medication and continued to give her castor oil. And she responded as if she was getting the pharmaceutical, even though she wasn't getting that anymore. And I was like, whoa, they said, this is called psychoneuroimmunology. It's a new field of medicine. I was like, great, I'm going to go to medical school because I'm really into that. And so I kind of went to medical school because I found this very mystical quality that humans could heal themselves. And then I got there, and that was, a good decade of time between med school and, my pediatrics training and my neurology training. By the time it was all finished, I realized I hadn't learned anything about that at all. But, in that process, I got married and I had children, and all these things sort of transpired. And, it's kind of a big mind control period, as many different kinds of professions can be. And so I remembered, actually, through my son getting ill, and that's, I think, a really important point I will make, is that, a lot of times these awakenings that we can have, or rememberings in my case, come through pattern interrupts, or these moments of life feeling like it's falling apart in some way. And in astrology, we know that can be a transit or a progression or something that can be doing this, hey, you wake up.
Snap out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so, I started studying herbalism, I studied integrative medicine, I started teaching, I started writing, I wrote my book, The Dirt Cure. And then I had another pattern interrupt, which was my son actually getting sick again, in a totally different context. And that at that time, and that was really my big, I think, spiritual awakening, because they can be like peeling layers of an onion over the course of your lifetime. I realized, oh, this is something spiritual. There's something energetic happening here. It's not just physical. Even though I knew I was doing all the physical things and I helped so many people using all these integrative approaches, I was like, this is like a spiritual sickness. And I just knew that, with all of my body and all of my heart in the moment that I knew it. And that took me on a journey to find spiritual teachers. It took me to Ecuador, where I studied with plants, I studied with elders, I studied with a particular teacher, and that journey has been continuing to unfold more and more since that time. So, these pattern interrupts happen in various ways. And I always say, we're surrounded by spiritual teachers, and children are definitely very high level spiritual teachers to us, because they can be real vehicles of awakening.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think it drives me to help people in the purpose realm is that we're so conditioned out of our authenticity, out of our connection with that within, with that sacredness, with, that intuition and all that stuff. And so the children bring you back, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, it's sort of that practical presence, right? Like the demand of the right now,
Yeah.
uh, that, you kind of can't escape.
Yeah. They're magical. And I hope your son is all better now. Are we all healed?
Yes. So that was, his second event was almost 10 years ago now. And so he is a strapping, over 6 foot, 17-year-old now, but still a very, I call him my muse, because so many things have unfolded through him, in my own spiritual path.
I call that, whenever I'm coaching people, I always say there are horsemen of the apocalypse that come in. And we know as astrologers, usually around this 37 to 42-year mark or something, right? Your nodal return, where it's like your relationship falls apart, somebody breaks up with you, divorce, or it's a health thing, like you said, with your son, even if it's somebody else's, and it puts you on a path of discovery because you love this person so much. Or there is some sort of, it's relationship, it's health, or it's money, right? Oh, right now we're about to, or we're already starting a recession, and people are saying, well, this is, how are you going to handle it? How are you going to handle it? You want to be prepared. Yeah, but are you spiritually prepared for it? Right? Are you really listening, like Dr. Maya? Are you guys taking the cues? Are you listening to, hey, there's a huge shift that wants to happen. That shift is going to feel painful, but it's an up level. I would say like the pain is a push to the pivot. And so are you listening, and are you surrendering to it? So you said it's been 10 years since the second layer of this. What has come up for you since, in terms of, okay, if I knew then what I know now about this connection between, the sacred and what I get to do here, and, how we live our lives, what has been the biggest piece of wisdom that you've had in the past 10 years since then?
Well, I did at 42 have a very dramatic Uranus opposition as well. And at that time ended up leaving my marriage and of 20 years and falling in love with a woman. So I had been with my spouse. I met him when I was 19 and got married when I was 23. And so, yeah, so that was a very dramatic time as well. And I really learned a lot about surrender, because Uranus transits are, when they come in a really unmistakable way, you really, resistance is futile.
That's right.
And
Like, bam, I always say that the Uranus impact is, there's a before and an after.
yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny because that was when I started studying astrology, was because I had no idea what was going on in my life. I was like, I I want things to remain as they are, but I feel like I got struck by lightning. That's what I kept saying. I feel like I got struck by lightning. I feel like there's electricity running through my body and like I'm going to jump out of my skin. And at that time, a friend of mine said, "Oh, maybe you should schedule a reading with this astrologer that, my friend likes." Turned out it was one of the most famous astrologers in the world, Rob Hand. I had no idea at all. I knew nothing about that. I really didn't know very much about astrology at all. And I had this call with him in a very momentous time.
Were you
And
skeptical? I mean, coming from, and this is something that's interesting. I always say I have a scientist's heart and an artist's mind, but most people are like, well, it's one or the other, right? When to me, it's a both and and world of different languages for the same thing. But did you have a moment where you were like, whatever astrology?
well, I think that was true on some level, but I think what it comes down to is we have a lot of languages to describe mystery. And right now, science is that predominant language, and it's in its way a very effective and interesting language. And I'm very fascinated by it always, even though it's not always used by humans in a very good way. The language of science itself is very exciting. But there are other languages, right? And ancient mystics developed really beautiful languages to help us navigate the unknown and help us interact with mystery. So, was I skeptical? Sure, but I was desperate. And I think very often, it's those moments when you are desperate that you end up really in that place of total humility. And we think of it we see it through a really negative lens, I think, in our society, but it's actually a very sacred place to be because it's when you can have your greatest connection with the divine, I think, when you're in those moments of total humility.
Yeah, I love that you said that because humility is such a big key that we forget in this society that really brings us and pushes us and sort of like says, hey, ego, focus on in the selfie and look like this and it's surface level and everything. And humility is completely the opposite of that. And it's a key because when we have those hard times, like you said, or like the, horsemen of the apocalypse, as I call them, you are at rock bottom. You feel like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. And I speak from experience, and so clearly multiple times. And so at those moments, you're like, it's exactly what you said. I'll try anything. And what that does is it completely opens up the quantum field, doesn't it? The possibilities are infinite because right now you're not like, oh, this is the right thing and that's the wrong thing. And I know what to do and I'm right about this and all this stuff. You're in a place of whatever is, just show me. And God, source, universe, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing again, shows you big time. And so, okay, so you went to this session and what did this person tell you?
Well, so he said, hey, I see this transit. He's like, oh, I see what's going on here because, basically he said, well, what can I do for you today? And I said, my life is falling apart and I'm the one imploding it. and I don't know why. So I just am looking for some kind of context or help or guidance here. And he said, well, blah, 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 starts kind of chattering, looking, and then he said, oh, you're in the Uranus opposition. And I went back and actually looked, some years later, and the day I felt that struck by lightning feeling where I fell in love with this woman was actually the day the Uranus opposition was exact for the second time.
Wow.
So it was like to the actual day. Very, very, it's very fascinating when you go back, right? Once you learn astrology and you go back and look at events in your life or events in other people's lives, like, oh, your house burned down on the day that Mars and Uranus came into exact conjunction, or, right, like these things where, it can be so literal almost sometimes.
Yeah, that hindsight with astrology it's fast. It's like in your face. It's like, look, okay, don't say I didn't tell you. For those of our viewers who don't understand, who are new to astrology, we do have actually an astrologer just talking about astrology in the summit, and it's fascinating going into purpose point notes and all these things. But talk about the cycle of the when you say Uranus opposition, what do you mean? So they get it.
Yeah, so everyone has certain transits that happen at certain times in their life. So at 28 to 30, everyone's having a Saturn return, which is when Saturn returns to the point that it was when you were born. And that happens again at other times in your life. And the time that I'm talking about is actually when Uranus is opposing your natal Uranus, where it was when you were born. So when that happens, it can be a big time of awakening. And oftentimes, as Rob Hand said to me, it's a time of midlife crisis. And I was like, screw you, dude, in a way, because I was like, don't make a cliche of like this horrible, wild, awful situation I'm in where everything's falling apart. But I got over that because he really talked me through what to do, what not to do. He's like, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with everyone around you. He's like, don't do things just impulsively. But this is a time where you're coming closer to your truth. He said some people at age 42, this happens for about everyone, right? Somewhere between 40 and 43, but usually around 42, 43. Women, for example, who have been really hardcore career women might leave and go home and, get married and have babies. And give up their career. Or, women who have been lifelong homemakers might be like, I'm going out into the workforce and I want to, be out in the world differently. He was like, you have done both of those things. So you are having your Uranus opposition in your own unique way, which was actually, really, I think the birth of my actually, studying astrology, which is very common to happen around the beginning of Uranus opposition. But also doing much more earth-based work, shamanic work, and just, it was a real time of coming out for me in every category of my life. And I think that's, still unfolding.
I love that. I call that coming out of the metaphysical closet. where you're like, okay, there's another layer of me that is going to really own up to some of these sacred gifts that I have and some of these practices that maybe other people are like, what are you doing? But, it's been a theme of this summit where a lot of people have said at that point where I was going to shift into what I felt was, I didn't even know exactly what it was, but I knew I had to change something, right? Like you did. Everybody around me was like, what are you doing? And so you get to follow that calling. So how do you interact with, I know your work is holistic. It's very focused on intuition. It's centered around the invisible world. The deeper it gets, right? You go from the material, the physical, the biological, the chemical into the energetic and all of that. How do you personally interact with the invisible world?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's something that's become so much a part of my minute to minute life most of the time, that putting words to it is almost difficult. But the way that I teach about it in my trainings in the Terrain Institute are really about, number one, like taking pauses and resting, being quiet, giving yourself time in nature, daydreaming. These are things that we've really devalued in a society that devalues magic or devalues mystery or devalues the sacred, right? Everything is commoditized, including our time, including us. We are the commodity, when you're on Facebook or Instagram or those kinds of things. So this idea of being kind of a renegade, right? To allow yourself to just use your imagination. I paint, but not because I really know how, but I call it make bad art TM. And I do that as a way of like connecting with my inner voice. And it actually helps me have guidance in my work, right? Because what you're talking about is like, how do we take all these sacred, divine, experiences we have, awakenings we have, practices we have, and still operate in a world that wants us to keep blinders on and wants us to not apply those concepts. So like things like play and doing things that like rest and just being quiet and just being out in nature and just listening to even yourself rather than like scrolling on Instagram. And I'm not saying, I don't scroll on Instagram. I mean, but having that awareness, that's the first step to being in communication with the invisible world. Just being in a place of noticing and sensing rather than doing all the time. And that's, that right there is plenty difficult, for I think a lot of us, because that's not the way the world is built.
It's a practice. It's a habit we get to build, isn't it? And it should. And I'm sure when your son was a little kid, you observed them connecting with that naturally, and all of us connect with it naturally because it's our nature. It's a spirit having a human experience, not the other way around. But it gets conditioned out of us. And the world doesn't necessarily support that unless you build an environment that really does support it. So I really like that you mentioned that it gets to be something that you consciously bring into your daily life. So we went into some of the sacred and the purpose and how you got there and the connection with all the stuff within, which is, this is the stuff we're doing with the Purpose to Prosperity Summit. We're tying the divine, the subtle, the soul calling and all of that with the more of this world. I don't even want to call it material, but whatever, things you want to have, whatever money you want to make, whatever finances, if your idea is to be a multimillionaire, if your idea is just to be like at a solid 6 figures or whatever that may look like for you, it's your prosperity, you get to define it. So take it a little more into the prosperity part. I look at all the shifts that you've made, and there's shifts that are going, a little like this and more within, even though they're also connecting so many things. Did you ever get maybe from your family or maybe even some of your thoughts like, shoot, if I shift my practice into a little more the sacred part or a little more of the things that are spiritual, will I lose clients? Is this gonna take me financially in a different direction? That's not what I want. Was there ever a moment of that? Or many moments.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there were many, many moments that, I think one of the most interesting things I've learned about being an entrepreneur, and that could be, when I was more doing my doctor practice or more in the kind of coaching that I do now in astrology or in my institute, it's a very spiritual path, because actually the biggest hurdle that you have is you yourself, right? So you're coming up against yourself again, all your fears, your shadow, how much you want to please other people, how afraid you are of criticism, all of the different things. And for me, I mean, it was like, it's been a lot of shedding again and again and again, right? Because I mean, even just when I started doing integrative medicine, like decades ago now, I was kind of leaving behind the medical community that had trained me, right? Like they're going to they kind of disavowed me in a certain way. And, each step, even like the integrative medicine world is like, wait a minute, like plant medicine and, plant spirits. And like, that was a little strange. And then, you go even farther and then they're like, wait, astrology, numerology, like, you're taking this so far, right? So there's always these moments where you do have to face the fact that you're shifting and you're changing, and you have to be somewhat aware of how that's affecting certainly the people around you, like colleagues or, partners or people like that. But also, and to your point about, what will my patients or my clients say, et cetera. So I remember talking to one of my spiritual teachers, who has since passed away, but she said, I said to her, I think I'm going to close my practice. And she said, why? And I said, well, because, I want to do spiritual work. And And she said, so? I said, so I don't think my patients and their families are going to be into that. She said, so then they'll leave. And I was like, yeah. And she said, and then other people will come who will find you because that's what they want. Like, I don't understand why that means you need to close your practice. And of course, that is what happened. And then, many more things unfolded from there, like my institute and all the trainings that I do. And it was just like, it was such an important moment for me to realize that yes and, right? And not like, oh, well, this is over and that's beginning. Like, we're always changing, we're always growing, we're always unfolding. And it's kind of a dance. And you don't always have to end the dance. You can, sometimes, yes, but sometimes the dance just changes.
I so agree with you. I think there's a place for, hey, you got to burn the bridge. Otherwise you're not going to take it to the next level. This is going to be a side hustle. You're going to be holding on to something else or whatever, or you got to take the leap out of the corporate world and step into entrepreneurship if that's what you really want to do, and just do it. But I'm the same with you. I still have my other business that I've had for many, many years. And then I started the coaching and I still kept the other business, but it was running on automatic. And so it is a yes and world. It's a both and world. Women, especially, who tend to be more multitasking or more, multi-passionate, as Marie Forleo says it, we get to do some of that. Now, do you get to schedule, like at this time, I'm going to do this and I'm going to put this is going to be my priority. Of course, we get to do that. But we get to flow. We get to feel into what's right for us. That's part of the whole, why I also added your unique self and your unique gifts and unique opportunities, because everybody can do it differently. Mm-hmm. We don't have to be looking at everybody like, oh, this is the map. Okay, great. Let me give you a blueprint, but then adapt it to yourself. So I absolutely love that you were able to take that advice and that you were able to serve everybody that you came here to serve. Because imagine you close that doctor practice. What about some people that are like, oh yeah, I would totally want to do this doctor part and give me the astrology part, give me all the sauce. And you would have missed out on that, and they would have missed out on what you can offer them. So beautiful, beautiful opening for you in that regard, and that you were able to really take that coaching. Now, you have a free gift for us, don't you?
Yes. So I have a Earth Medicine Healing Bundle that is several different practices around grounding, around using spiritual plant brushing practice, and a meditation, all that basically are ways of connecting to the sacred, just in really simple and accessible ways that you can do anytime, any day. So that is something I want to make available to everybody who's watching this today.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. I just, I come from a family that's very metaphysical, very like earth, very sacred. I have an account called Modern Sacred Woman. Which is how I see you, right? We get to do this the way we want to do it. You don't have to look a certain way, wear certain things or anything. You get to interact in the world. And please, everybody, let Dr. Maya be an example for you of, you get to do what you want to do. You get to be in the science, you get to be in the spirit, you get to shift multiple ways, you get to up level your life, you get to go through the ups and downs and still come out. So take the coaching from Dr. Maya and take the tool and do something with it. And then let her know, tell us what your Instagram is, or your where we can find you on the internet, so people can give you the feedback on applying this beautiful free gift.
So yeah, absolutely. My website is the best way to reach out to me, drmaya.com, drmaya.com. And I'm also on Instagram, Dr. Maya She Treat, like the word she and treat put together, Dr. Maya She Treat. And yes, that is my real name, on Instagram. And so those are the two probably best ways to see what I'm up to and reach out.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to be Courtney here. It was a treat. It really was, to talk to you from this perspective of something that is, for me, so close to my heart, which is really tying all of the things and living in a both and reality, and seeing somebody really own it and do something so beautiful to serve the world with it. So thank you for being here and for sharing your gifts, your story, all that you have to offer, and may continue to be so. And may your son continue to be super healthy and just, grow out and do whatever he came to do in this world. So thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much. It was my honor.
And thank you to everybody for being open to this information. If you're new to astrology or to herbology or tying all of these things together, that's okay. This is not like, oh, I'm behind, or what is this, or feeling threatened. This is something where you get to explore at whatever level you want to explore. Like, hey, let me figure out what astrology is saying about my purpose. Let me figure out, Dr. Maya was talking about the plant medicine to heal or to connect. What is that? Does that resonate with me? Is that something that I'd be interested in looking into? We're all unique. We're all here at our own pace, doing our own thing. So let these stories inspire you. Let this information allow you to maybe see if you resonate with this, and then take some action, and let us both know via Instagram or how you can get a hold of us. We've got all the information here in the summit. Let us know how it goes for you. The gold is in the action. The gold is in the action. So take this stuff and do something with it. And thank you so much for having been here with us for this session.